This tiny little peninsula is the Forlorn Point. On a cold, dark January night, almost 100 years ago, an extraordinary tale began to unfold right here on these rocks. The story had in fact begun to unfold 2 weeks earlier in Baltimore on the east coast of the United States of America. On the 29th of December 1925, a 5,500-ton steamship named the SS Valdura sailed out of Baltimore. She was loaded to capacity with Indian corn, bound for the port of Liverpool. Even though it was early January, weather conditions were good, and she steamed across the Atlantic in 2 weeks. They safely passed the Hook Lighthouse, at which point the captain began to look out for Carnsore Point, where he would intend to change his bearing to north and enter the Irish Sea. But the SS Valdura didn't make it to Carnsore Point that night. Halfway between the Hook Lighthouse and Carnsore Point was the Forlorn Point at Kilmore Quay. The captain should have plotted a course south of the Salty Islands, but he made a mistake in his calculations and steamed straight across Ballyteague Bay before, unbelievably, running full ahead onto the rocks at the Forlorn Point at Kilmore Quay. Miraculously, the hull was largely undamaged and she was not taking on water. The hope was that she could be refloated with the high tide the following day. Although the weather was unseasonably calm, there was considerable urgency in getting the refloating operation underway because, as it was the 12th of January that she ran aground, there was every danger that a storm would come along and she could be wrecked on the rocks and lost. A powerful tugboat named the Morsecock was dispatched from Cove. But even with this and the high tide, the SS Valdura was well and truly wedged on the rocks, weighed down by her 4,500-ton cargo of Indian corn. After another couple of unsuccessful refloating operations, her owners were getting, understandably, very worried that the ship and her cargo would be lost to them. So they decided there was nothing else for it only to lighten the ship so that she could refloat with the spring tide. This meant unloading thousands of tons of corn onto the rocks. It was valuable corn, so they decided that the corn would be auctioned. Advertisements were placed in local newspapers, and the sale was handled by Thomas Sutton of the Hotel, Kilmore Quay, and Walsh and Corish auctioneers of Wexford and Town. Buyers were advised to bring their own sacks, and that the price would be 5 shillings per sack. The ship's owners employed locals to unload the corn from the holds of the ship onto the rocks. This went on for many weeks until the lightened ship was finally refloated in early March. What is most remarkable is that the weather held fine for 2 months. Had a storm come along in January or February, the ship and its cargo would almost certainly have been lost. She was towed from Kilmore Quay to Passage East in Waterford for repairs in April 1926. Interestingly, she went on to sail the high seas until 1942, when, as she made her way from Newfoundland toward Australia, she foundered off Nova Scotia.